Good morning. I'm Allison Jordan, and on behalf of Wine Institute, the California Association of Winegrape Growers, and the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today to focus on this critically important topic. May is National Wildfire Awareness Month, and with our industry's experience with wildfires over the past several years and regular news about this ongoing threat, we thought it would be helpful to invite two experts to talk about best practices for preparing your vineyard and winery to reduce risk, and I'll introduce them shortly. Wine Institute and CAWG colleagues are also going to be sharing information about resources available for wildfire prevention and insurance issues related to wildfires. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. We'll go through all of the presentations first and save time at the end of the webinar for your questions and answers. So please use the Q&A section to submit your questions. And we also welcome you to communicate with the panelists and other attendees via the chat function. So with that, first I would like to introduce Tom Knecht. He is the Pre-Fire Division Chief for the Sonoma Lake Napa unit of CalFire, and his 33-year fire service career began at the age of 15 as an explorer at Belmont Fire Station in the San Mateo Santa Cruz unit. He now oversees defensible space inspection, fuel reduction project planning and implementation, public information and education, damage inspection, and the unit's strategic fire plan. Chief Knecht, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm going to talk about defensible space and how to prepare your structures and get ready for wildfire. This is meant for wine growers and sort of the commercial wine industry. All of the things that I am going to present can be found at readyforwildfire.org. There is a tremendous amount of information there for not only residents, but you can use for your own use in your businesses and preparing a winery or your industry for a wildfire. You can see there's three sections in there in the website: is getting your structures ready, getting you ready or your staff ready, and then a quick reference guide for evacuations if needed. Defensible space is really important because it not only helps you protect your structures in the event of an oncoming wildland fire. It actually helps prevent a wildfire from starting in and around structures. Most fires are caused by human activity. So accidental fires, if they are slowed before they get into the real wildlands, it helps buy time for responders to come or your own staff to take extinguishing methods and to put an accidental fire out. When we talk about defensible space, we're not talking about removing all vegetation. We're talking about thinning dense stands of brush and trees. We want to create separation based on slope. So on a flat slope, we can have closer spacing. On steeper slopes, we'll want more spacing in between individual trees. We want to prevent that ground fire from getting into the crown canopy, and we don't want to have fire travel from tree to tree to tree. So all of that helps slow a fire as it approaches, and it also by not removing all the vegetation, we keep vegetation holding the soils together, which is important. And also having a canopy in place reduces the solar heating of the dead and down fuels on the ground. So simply having shade in place also prevents fires from the fuels from drying out, and then retards the spread of fire even more. So we want to limb up to a certain point. As you can see right here, we want to separate the ground and the aerial fuels, and then we want to have spacing. And for vineyards, that's where if you have a zone around your property, then you could put in a shaded fuel break. This would be and this would be your practice there too. Over here, we have two examples. We have a brush area, and then we have sort of a tree area, timber area. And this is an example of where we keep individual trees for shading and to maintain soil quality for erosion purposes. And then here's an excellent example of a great shaded fuel break alongside of a road. We have great separation between the crowns and the ground. And then individual trees have been removed to separate, to have some good spacing in between the individual trees. I'm gonna jump over here to, we're gonna transition into defensible space around structures, which would apply for commercial buildings as well. I'm gonna highlight a couple of points in this next slide. So here is your 100-foot zone. You may have a local ordinance that meets or exceeds Public Resource Code 4291. So you have to pay attention to that. And that varies from Oregon to Mexico, whether there's a local ordinance in place or not. But for the state standard Public Resource Code 4291, we want to clear 100 feet around all habitable structures into two zones that I'll speak to. You have a 30-foot zone that extends out, and in there, one of the things I want to highlight is you really want to pay attention. I think there was a lot of in the Sonoma Lake Napa fires of last year, there was a lot of structures that were destroyed outside the fire perimeter and even inside of very well-maintained winery buildings. Because they had a lot of leaf litter on roofs, or they had combustible roofs. So you may do all your defensible space around a structure, but all it takes is one ember to land in the leaf pile on the roof, and then you have an established roof fire. So, and then anything that's around a deck too, or combustible materials that are close to the structure, you'll want to move away or change out if you can. Again, so the first zone, the first 30 feet are really like a lean and mean. We're not talking, we want to have that ornamental vegetation is good, but the really short grass or things that will not allow the fire embers falling to catch your structure on fire. And then the second zone, that second 70 feet is where you really want to concentrate on spacing and then reducing the ground fuels from the aerial crown fuels. There is a new regulation coming forth. It's not law yet, but it's called Zone 0. And it's the ember resistant zone that's within 5 feet of a building structure or deck. We have found, unfortunately, with the last 5 years of fires, that people are doing their defensible space, but we're still losing, getting damaged or destroyed structures because of bark, ornamental bark or the combustible materials, wood decks that are within that first 5 feet of a building. So hardscaping with gravel or concrete or pavers, wooden fences, at least that if the fence connects to the building, have that 5 feet of fence at least be of a non-combustible style. These regulations, this is a guideline right here, and it's all in readyforwildfire.org. And the Board of Forestry and Fire Protection will be developing the regulation that is expected January of 2023, is my understanding. Lastly, when you're some of the things you can do to harden your home is to change your roof to a non-combustible type. If you can change out decks or from wood to a non-combustible, all of those things will help your fire or your structures resist fire from an approaching wildland fire. And then lastly, I want to advocate too, if you have vineyard workers that are using equipment, if you have construction that's, involves torches or grinding or welding, you definitely need to have people or fire, the ability to extinguish an accidental fire on site, and with a portable water extinguisher or hand tools. And then if possible, do all of your work before 10 a.m. or at least while the humidities are higher and that there's no wind. If you have a really high, dry, windy day or red flag warning, and you have an option to maybe delay or not do the work that could cause that may increase the chance of an accidental fire, then you should probably delay it. That's all I have for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief. Really useful information, and it's great that people can refer back to the brochure that you were using. So thank you so much. And next, I'd like to welcome Rich Casale, who spent the last 47 years working for the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, first as a district conservationist until his retirement in 2017. And most recently, he's been a contractor assisting with recovery and restoration efforts in California communities and in wine regions. He's a certified professional in erosion and sediment control, which is a certification program he co-founded 40 years ago and now has over 20,000 certified professionals worldwide. Rich, I'm so glad you could join us. Over to you.
Thank you, Allison, and thank everyone that's joined us today. Let me bring up my PowerPoint here. There we go. Hopefully everybody can see this. So my topic is wildfire preparedness for vineyards.
Rich, I'm sorry, really quickly, it's not showing yet. So if you could.
Okay. It's up on my screen. Let's see, make sure I'm sharing it too. Hold on a second. I think I forgot one thing. Here we go.
Now we can see it.
We got it?
We got it.
Okay, very good. Sorry for that little technical difficulty. Forgot one step in there. So yeah, my presentation will be on wildfire preparedness for the vineyards as opposed to around the wineries, although there may be a little bit of overlap, and I'm trying not to overlap Tom's presentation, so and concentrate more on the vineyard itself. So what's going on up here? So wildfire preparedness, some things that I saw and learned following the 2017 and 2019 wine country fires. I've met with literally hundreds of property owners in those two wine country fires. Most recently in the Santa Cruz CZU fire, I met with over 400 property owners post-fire, giving them help to restore their damage and or prepare for the next fire. But what some of the things that I saw and learned from the wine country fires was, first, vineyards fared much better, even if they didn't burn, because of various reasons I'll mention in a few seconds, but also unprepared property owners. I found many vineyards and wineries were in close proximity to public roads, to that wildland interface, and to other fire hazards. So they were prone to be affected by wildfire because of those things around them. A lot of fires start alongside public roads, for example. And a lot of our vineyards are pushed into that wildland area or wildland interface. So they're going to be more prone as well. And then looking around the property and wineries, noticing combustibles around buildings. In many cases, as Tom mentioned, these combustibles can intensify and or even cause a structural fire. So it's one of those things that you can do to help reduce the likelihood of your winery being affected by a wildland fire, even if it's, several hundred yards away or a quarter mile away just from those floating embers. And then I found soil and slope damages caused by the firefighting effort. And a lot of those were unavoidable, but in some cases, if growers are providing adequate access and upgraded access to their property, less damage will most likely be done if a fire is fought on your property in the future. I also found a lot of plastic road culverts vaporized, jeopardizing critical fire access and emergency exits as well. And a lot of times, these plastic road culverts were not all that noticeable. They literally vaporized, leaving a lot of times the impression of the pipe, and yet you almost have to get down on your hands and knees and touch it to see whether or not it is soil or is it plastic. So we'll talk a little bit more about plastic infrastructure in the vineyard in a moment. Also noticed limited access and no alternative exit. Was a one-way in, a one-way out scenario. And then once again, a lot of plastic surface pipes, drain inlets, plastic tanks, fencing. And all of this stuff melts. And so it can obviously have an effect on your vineyard infrastructure and even in the firefighting effort in the vineyard. So why did vineyards receive less wildfire damage? I found that maintained vineyards acted as natural fuel breaks. Vines were well pruned. There was no dead wood in the vines. Vine row spacing and density helped break up the continuity on the landscape. A mowed or a cultivated cover crop at the right time of the year reduced the hazard of fire on the floor of the vineyard. There wasn't a fuel ladder as a result of cover crops, say, growing into the vines or vines not well pruned and in contact with the soil, and that there was a low mulch layer or no mulch layer, depending on the time of the year. Additionally, there wasn't any fuel in the way of wood or combustibles actually in the vineyard itself, as well as no hazardous structures in the vineyard itself. Maybe on the perimeter. There were a few situations where wineries were in and around the vineyard, but for the most part, just looking at the vineyard landscape, we didn't have that in the vines areas. Irrigated crops typically have a higher moisture content, more so during any kind of irrigation that might take place in the vineyard. And so naturally, the vines are a little bit more fire resistant than they would be if they weren't irrigated. Saying that, even in dryland vineyards, the green leafy material is better than dry material, obviously. And then water availability in vineyards, ponds, reservoirs, and high gallon per minute ag wells. So firefighters do have access to that, whether they're private or CalFire or other, whereas a general home or rural property may just have, not the access to the higher per minute wells. So growers also, they reduce plant growth already around vineyards to lessen shading effects from trees and what have you, but also host plants that might, host an environment for damaging insects, and others are doing it actually for fire hazard reduction. So that's all good and should continue to be done by growers that are doing that, but also growers that maybe have that on their back burner need to think about it more seriously here as we go into the future. Because it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And each year, it seems like we keep getting the worst fires in California history and break records every year. And it just seems like we're on that trajectory, unfortunately. But the more we can do, and the more that we can do in the community and not just by each individual vineyard, will even be much better. So agricultural properties also have access to tractors and workers to help protect the vineyard and also do a lot of the fire hazard reduction work and practices. Vineyard perimeter accesses are very common, and these access roads can have acted as natural fire breaks. So those were all some of the reasons why vineyards fared better than, say, average rural properties. Now let's look at a few of the preparedness practices for vineyards. Fire breaks and fuel breaks. A lot of times I hear these two terms interchangeably, but there's actually a difference between a fire break and a fuel break. And a fire break is basically 10 to 30 feet wide with all plants removed right down to bare mineral soil. Whereas a fuel break typically is wider than a fire break, but the fuel is reduced rather than completely eliminated. As Tom explained with the, the installation or maintenance of shaded fuel breaks that I'll mention here in a second as well. So fire breaks can be bladed or disc fire breaks. Note that disc breaks have an erosion potential. So when I meet with growers, I'm always, trying to look at the big picture. I want to make sure folks are not doing one thing only to cause another problem. So things are connected out there. So if we do go with a disc fire break, then we also have to deal with what do we do to help lessen the hazard of erosion on those disc breaks, and what do we do about it? Then there are green fire breaks where annual cool season grasses can be used, mowed, and or disc before the fire season, but they give protection to the fire breaks during the winter time for the erosion factor instead of having them bare ground. And that is particularly important on some of our more steeper sloped vineyards and our foothills and mountainous areas. Flat ground vineyards, not so much, but anyway, there's an option there. And then there are a lot of natural fire breaks, some that are human-made, like ponds and reservoirs in cultivated land, but also in the way of streams and as existing road networks, whether they're private streets and roads or county roads or highways, can also act as natural fire breaks. And then the access roads in the vineyard, not just around the perimeter, but they all, if they don't already act as a fire break, they can be improved to serve as fire breaks. So fire breaks, typically, you want to locate them along public roads, ridge lines, around the perimeter of vineyards and structures. These fire breaks also give firefighters access to the fire. So they have multiple functions, and not just helping to reduce the movement of fire into or through the vineyard, but it also gives access. It also provides access for the grower for better vineyard access all year round. So they serve multiple purposes. So the fuel break, in contrast to a fire break, you can place those on either side of fire breaks, including roads, to help lower, fire intensity and fire hazard. The shaded fuel breaks reduce fuel by providing a window between the understory and the canopy and of tree branches above. So it helps to reduce the fuel ladder from the fuel on the ground, from going up into the canopies of trees and then moving across the landscape through the canopy. Using fuel breaks to protect vineyard and structures is a really critical practice that should be incorporated in most, if not all, vineyards. So fire breaks, I think just went the wrong way. Other wildfire preparedness practice for vineyards, including reducing the overall fuel load around the vineyard. When I say that, we need to look beyond the fence lines, and this may require you to involve your neighbors or improve your working relationships with your neighbor. Now, your neighbor may not have a vineyard. Maybe they have rangeland or forest land or urban land, what have you. But fire doesn't stop on these invisible lines on the landscape. And you can do all the work, to the best of your ability and textbook in around your vineyard. But once you get to the property line, you lose control unless you have a working relationship with your neighbor. And a lot of times you see neighboring property owners with tremendous fire hazard, not only for fires to start, but fires to burn hot and to burn fast, and can really super affect your vineyard. So working on a more community-based or neighborhood-based or on more than just one property is important. Removing dead wood, brush, and debris. Now, at some point, where do you stop that? If you have hundreds of yards or a quarter a mile of it from your vineyard, depending on how large your vineyard is. Ready for Fire website, what Tom had said about the defensible space holds true as we go out into that wildland area beyond your vineyard. But you can start removing dead trees, dead wood, dead brush, limbing things up, creating some shaded fuel breaks, as far as you can go, but say within 100 to 200 feet would be ideal. You want to try and break up that plant canopy continuity as well, and that might involve thinning trees around the vineyard. So you reduce the density of material in the canopy, but you so that fire burns cooler rather than hotter, but it's not as connected either. So you don't have fire burning through canopies and rushing across the landscape. You'll be helping your neighbors out, but you'll also be helping yourself out as well. So reducing mulch depth. When mulching is required or used in a vineyard, particularly going into the rainy season, you really only need a couple of inches, and the deeper it is, the more of a fire hazard it becomes. A lot of mulches are laid out, say, before October 15th, even in September in some cases, when the fire season is at its worst. So I saw one vineyard in Napa, actually it was in Alexander Valley, completely destroyed from the mulch catching on fire in the Kincaid fire. So I'm learning a lot from some of the erosion control practices that are installed and their fire hazard when we're outside of the, of the winter. So keeping that mulch layer thinner, it still does its job if it's 2 inches. A lot of people think, well, if it does a good job at 2 inches, then 4 inches might be better. But if you're laying that down in the fall, I would say if you're going to go thicker, wait till the first significant rains at the very least. But you really don't have to go that thick. And you really need to spread that that mulch. I've seen where the laborers get real lazy and flakes end up going out on the landscape. We'll talk about a combustible. You want to try to limit the amount of clumpiness that occurs with mulching vineyards. You want to the degree possible, remove vegetation contact with structures and with wood in particular. You want to use fire-resistant materials, change out where you can, metal or concrete versus wood or plastic. Even with your above-ground pipes, go with metal over plastic. If tanks need to be replaced, can consider metal or stainless steel tanks. There's even concrete tanks, fences, replacing those with metal again. Drains and surface inlets. I mean, I saw underground drains in vineyards completely vaporized as well, because there was, access for oxygen through the system, and the suckers just burned right through, and then the land collapsed into these underground drains. So at least we get the risers being metal or concrete, can help protect that underground plastic infrastructure. And then using fire-resistant plant materials. All plants weren't created equally. So plants that are used in the landscape, whether it's around the winery, around the perimeter of the vineyard, in areas that don't have plants and you're looking for plant materials, then let's look at plants that have a lower fire rating. I developed a list of plants and a fire guide with the California Native Plant Society. That's available for plant suggestions. So I know I'm probably getting close to the end of my presentation. I'll try to finish up here quickly. A few other practices is knowing the amount and location of your site water, your storage, and your source, including ponds and reservoirs. But it may also be a time to think about developing new sources and making those sources friendly for firefighting, having the right connections and hookups and what have you. Have plenty clear access around winery and other structures for the firefight, and remove those flammables and combustibles. Have clear exit routes and more than one exit. And even if that more than one exit is by foot, that can save lives. Many people don't do the footwork literally around the vineyards to know where there might be safe access points where folks can flee if a fire is coming from one direction, even if there isn't a road there. Many vineyards are located in boxed-in areas, boxed-in canyons, one way in and only one way out. So sometimes having an exit route by foot, some of those foot trails can be easily enlarged by firefighting equipment in the fighting of fires, so they don't have to just tear across the landscape someplace and do more damage than necessary. They're working in areas where there's less work to be done because the grower has already done some of that work for them. So knowing the response time of fire crews and how far you are away from the nearest fire station, having a relationship with your local fire district or CalFire is important. I tell a lot of folks, don't wait till the last minute to evacuate. You need to comply with evacuation orders. You don't want to be meeting fire crews on your way out on the, at the last minute, because it's going to slow down their work and their time to respond as well. It also puts everybody in a more hazardous situation. So having an annual pre-fire property inspection is important, whether you do it or you do it with a fire district official or CalFire, or even with an employee of the Natural Resources Conservation Service or Resource Conservation District. Once you have a pretty good handle on what that inspection is each year, it's something you probably can do yourself. Have a property emergency plan, but again, coordinate that with what the neighbors may have, or put one together for your general area. Have a posted evacuation plan, have regular fire training for your workers, and make your vineyard a winner rather than a loser. Firefighters know which properties to save without risking lives. If you've done your homework, a firefighter and a fire chief is going to say, hey, wow, fire captain, they're going to say, hey, wow, that's a fire that we can fight. That's a winery that we can save. That's a vineyard that we can help. But where that work hasn't been done, I don't think that the firefighters are potentially going into certain death. So it is a way to make your vineyard something that's worthy of a fight. So what I saw post-fire now, just a little bit more from lessons learned, was panic and desperation, and or part of that is from receiving poor advice, or folks jumping the gun, basically to get the work done and to get things cleaned up ASAP. But in doing that, they become their own worst enemy, and oftentimes they are adding insult to injury and providing a false sense of security. They could also be wasting their time and money because they think they're doing the right thing, but in effect, they're doing the wrong thing. And a lot of times they're doing the wrong thing by doing what the neighbor's doing, thinking that the neighbor's doing the right thing. In fact, the neighbor was doing the wrong thing. In some cases, maybe the neighbor was doing the right thing, but it's not the right thing for your vineyard or for your winery. So I advise on getting good advice. Going to a local resource conservation district or your local office of the Natural Resources Conservation Service. Both provide free technical and financial assistance and can help you make the right call and the right decisions before throwing everything but the kitchen sink at your vineyard or your burned areas or areas affected by fire, And then lastly, these are some other things I noticed, that smoke and heat damaged slopes were removed unnecessarily and way too soon, and certainly before the rainy season or even during the rainy season. Where now they were doing one thing to maybe beautify an area or thinking that they were making it look better, only to create a slope instability issue or an erosion issue or a runoff issue or a sediment issue or a problem for their neighbors or other problems. I also saw a lot of poorly located installed measures, including such things as straw bales. I can't believe that they're still used, but it's not a practice that we really promote anymore. And if we do, it's a very involved, detailed practice that needs design, and it needs to be installed properly, and it's short-lived, and it doesn't work as much as it doesn't work. But one of the practices that's put in more often than not can do a lot more damage are straw wattles. I would say 60%, and I'm probably underestimating or exaggerating, I'm not exaggerating, that those are installed incorrectly. A lot of times not even needed, and in some cases actually causing a new problem to occur. And then for some reason, people like to go to runoff control first. And just remember, when you control runoff, you control nature, and that almost never ends well. We need to respect natural landscape and the natural way that water runs over and through the landscape. So runoff control can really have super damaging consequences after fire, but also even before fire from an erosion standpoint. So really get help before you get too involved with moving and concentrating water around the landscape, and particularly in the post-wildfire landscape. And then a lot of other unnecessary soil and slope disturbances that occur to try and, make things better, but end up making things worse. So last and least is, once again, this is the Ready for Fire website through CalFire. The Natural Resource Conservation Service has both technical and financial assistance available for vineyards, and all of the services are free. NRCS is a federal non-regulatory agency under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We've been around for over 85 years. We worked intimately with growers. Many of you that have joined us today have probably worked with NRCS in the past, but a lot of the practices that NRCS promotes and provides incentives for have a fire hazard reduction effect as well. So check them out if you haven't already, and it was a pleasure to be with you today, and hopefully I can answer any of your questions at the end of our program.
Thank you so much, Rich. You have so much experience now, and we really appreciate you being on and sharing it. One quick question is, where can people find the fire-resistant native plants that you mentioned?
It is on the California Native Plant Society website. So California Native Plants, and it is a free publication. It's about a 65-page. I have it online. I can certainly send it out to email. If anybody sees my email here on the screen, they can email me. I can send them a electronic version of it. But if you want a nice hard copy version of it, they are free from the Native Plant Society. So just go to California Native Plant Society. I don't have their website but if you just search for that, it will come up.
Great, and we can be sure to share that with all the other resources.
Yeah, I also have a supplementary list that they helped me develop for the fire areas, both in Southern California and in Northern California, that I can share with growers as well.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And next we have Noelle Cremers, Wine Institute's Director of Environmental and Regulatory Affairs, who is going to share some information about grants available for wildfire prevention. Over to you, Noelle.
Thanks, Allison. Rich, if you can stop sharing, and then I can put my...
Yeah, I'm trying to do that. Let's see.
Okay.
Where do I stop sharing? I said new share. Stop.
It should
share.
be at the top of your screen.
Stop video. Question that. New share, pause share. More. I guess I have leave, and I'm gonna leave in.
Oh, it worked.
There you go.
Okay. Thank you, whoever helped me out on that.
Okay. So, Allison, is the slideshow up or the presenter view up?
It looks like it is the slideshow.
Okay, wonderful. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Noelle Cremers with Wine Institute, and provide a very quick high-level overview of wildfire grants that are available for folks to use, both for pre-fire fuel reduction efforts and then also for post-fire recovery. So CalFire has a number of grants, and these are aimed both at private landowners as well as larger community scale projects. So the California Forest Improvement Program is aimed at private forest landowners. So if you own both a winery and forest land, this would be an opportunity for you to apply. Any forest landowner is eligible, and it's to improve the health of the forest. So it's not aimed directly at thinning, but it can be used as a thinning program if that's going to improve the health of your forest. Then there's Wildfire Resilience and Forestry Assistance Grant, and this is a larger scale grant that goes to community organizations with then the ultimate aim of getting funding out on the ground to individual landowners through technical assistance and direct financial assistance to help reduce wildfire risk. Then the last two, the Forest Health Program and Fire Prevention Grant Program, are a much larger scale grant program. So Forest Health Grant Program can go directly to landowners, but the minimum project size is 800 acres. So it also can go to local governments and NGOs. So this Forest Health Program is aimed at doing fuel reduction projects on a large community-wide scale. Fire prevention grants cannot go to private landowners, only to local governments, NGOs, tribes, other kind of bigger groups, and that's aimed at fuel prevention. And then also it can go towards education and fire prevention planning. And those are all state level grants, and Wine Institute has been involved in pushing for additional funds. There was $536 million approved earlier this year for early action funds, and a bulk of that money will actually come through these grants. So there is funding available through that to help landowners and communities improve their fire resilience. Then there are a couple of local grant programs. So the North Bay Forest Improvement Program is available to forest landowners in Lake County, Mendocino County, Napa County, and Sonoma County, and you apply through the RCD. So that actually, this is the on-the-ground funding from the Wildfire Resilience and Forestry Assistance Grant from CalFire. This is now in place, so landowners in those counties can go and take action and get technical assistance and financial assistance to reduce fire risk on their properties. The maximum grant for that program is $200,000. And then the California Fire Safe Council also has funding available from the U.S. Forest Service. That grant is open currently and will be accepting applications through June 15th. Property owners associations are eligible, as well as for-profit companies, and then also NGOs, local governments. That's a fuel reduction grant program, as well as wildfire planning and education. Now moving into USDA's grants, and I want to kind of make one overarching statement here. These grants are Farm Bill programs, and there's a maximum adjusted gross income limit. So that limit is, these programs are only eligible to landowners who are ag producers that make less than, have an adjusted gross income of less than $900,000. But if you are in that category, there's a number of programs available to help both with fire prevention as well as post-fire recovery. So the EQIP program that's run by NRCS, where Rich used to work and still coordinates with, they do a lot of conservation practices where you can go in and get funding for prescribed grazing, brush removal, a lot of work to help reduce fire risk on your property, and then also implement practices post-fire to restore and conserve those properties. Then the Farm Services Agency has 3 different programs that help in recovery. So the Emergency Forest Restoration Program has up to $500,000 per disaster to help restore non-industrial timberland to a healthy forest capacity. The Emergency Conservation Program can help restore ag lands after a fire. So if you had a vineyard burn, they can help assist removing debris after the fire. And then the Tree Assistance Program can help replace vines that were lost in a fire, as long as it was more than 15% of the vineyard that was lost. And then there are some FEMA grants, although these grants are going directly to firefighting agencies. But if your local governments and local firefighting agencies are short-staffed or need additional equipment or training, this would be an opportunity to push them to apply for funding so that they can be more prepared going forward. So those are that's a really fast overview of the grants that are out there. There are more. This was just quick, high level. We'll be sharing more information about the specifics, but feel free after the webinar, but feel free to reach out to me if you have specific questions about eligibility and application processes, and we can would be happy to assist with that. So thank you very much, and back to you, Allison.
Thanks so much, Noelle. Really helpful information. And finally, I'd like to welcome Michael Miiller, the Director of Government Relations for the California Association of Winegrape Growers. And Michael is going to discuss insurance issues related to wildfires, which is obviously another important topic for the industry. So thanks, Michael.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you for putting this together. Greatly appreciate your time this morning, and I will try to be brief, as Noelle has also. One of the continuing issues that we hear about relative to wildfires is the availability of insurance. We started hearing about this after the 2017 fires. We heard about cancellation of some policies. In some cases, premiums increased by 6-7-fold. In other cases, the deductibles for the insurance policies became so great there was no point in getting the policies. Some growers, winemakers, went to an insurance broker, put out 5 or 6 different, offers, trying to find some availability of insurance, and just were unable to find a meaningful policy. And while that began in 2017, it's just gotten worse and worse and worse over the last 4 years. There's a lot of regulation relative to residential insurance policies, but there's not much regulation for commercial insurance. While the California Insurance Commissioner has tremendous statutory authority for auto insurance, for residential insurance, for some health insurance, there's just minimal oversight for commercial policies like an umbrella policy, commercial property, those kinds of things. One potential solution, and as you can imagine, the legislature and the Insurance Commissioner are both actively engaged in this, as is the Wine Institute and CAWG, where we're trying to find some solutions. One option that is out there is a bill called SB 11 by Senator Rubio, who's the chair of the Senate Insurance Committee. That bill would authorize the FAIR Plan to sell commercial coverage to farms. And the FAIR Plan is the Fair Access to Insurance Requirements. That's the name of the plan, FAIR. It's intended to be an insurer of last resort. So if you can't find insurance out there in the marketplace, you can come to the FAIR Plan for coverage. Currently, the FAIR Plan excludes farm risk from coverage. So what SB 11 does is it creates an exemption to that exclusion for insuring farm risk. So it would allow the FAIR Plan to sell commercial coverage to farms, specifically farm structures. This would cover outbuildings, sheds, irrigation, potentially solar panels, and other structures on farm land. Crop insurance covers the loss of the commodity yield or revenue. The crop insurance is readily available, and SB 11 would not authorize FAIR Plan to sell crop insurance. So that would be unchanged by SB 11. It would only apply to farm structures and would be very similar to coverage that's available in the marketplace for business, any kind of a building structure for commercial buildings. Now, SB 11 offers a long-term solution for growers and winemakers, but it doesn't really offer an immediate solution. The thing with SB 11 is that would take effect in January, and they have to go through 1 year of rate setting. So you may not see some relief under SB 11 until 1.5 years down the road. There's other efforts in place also. AB 1439 by Senate Member Levine. It offers a property insurance discount for hardening property. Some people are finding that that costs a substantial amount of money to harden your property to protect it from a wildfire that comes through your area. But at the same time, you spend all that money to protect that property, but you can't get insurance for it. It becomes a bit of a disincentive for people to spend that money. So we're trying to correct that also. That bill's currently stalled, but we're hoping that that bill moves soon. In the short term, the insurance commissioner has also gone out to the marketplace, right? So all the insurance companies in California, whether they have a commercial coverage, residential, auto insurance, whatever, to the extent that they offer these policies, the insurance commissioner has some authority over them. So what the insurance commissioner is doing is to go to the marketplace and say, I want to see your data. So this is what's called a data call. They're asking insurance companies, we want to know how many policies are being canceled. What kind of policies are they? How many policies have substantial increases in the premium? What kind of policies are they? How many policies are having substantial increases in the deductibles? And what kind of property insurance are they? So the idea is to really get a handle on what's happening in the marketplace, and then use that data, use that information to go through a regulatory process and a legislative process, and hopefully as early as by the end of the year, pass some reforms that will create more options for people seeking insurance. Because right now, that whole conversation in the legislature, in the regulatory arena, is pretty much anecdotal at this point. And the more we have real data to support that anecdotal information, the better chances of success we'll have. And that is a very, very high overview. I want to be sensitive to time here and allow some time for Q&A. And with that, I will turn it over to Allison. Thank you.
Great. And if we could have all of our panelists join us, that would be great. We do have a few questions. Some are very practical. So I'll start with one that I think Rich touched on, but just to be really specific, who do we contact for pre-fire inspections? Chief Knecht, you could maybe respond to that. And
yeah, I got a great answer for that. If you're in the state responsibility area, you can reach out to your local CalFire unit, and they can have either an engine come out and give an inspection, or a defensible space inspector. If you're not in the SRA and the LRE, just reach out to your local fire department or fire district. They can provide that for you.
Great. So, and I think this next question is based on some of the information that Rich provided, which is around evacuation. And because vineyards seem to have those fire break abilities, the question is, if we're not able to evacuate, does the vineyard provide a place to shelter in place? If so, what do we need to know if we have to do that?
I'll let Tom take a stab at it.
Yeah,
first.
that's a tough one. There's nothing, it's going to vary from place to place. Sheltering in place is, just that. If you have a hardened structure, and that's the only place to go. If you can't safely evacuate, then that's a good place to go, or a wide parking lot, or, to stay in your car, keep the car running, so that when the fire passes or you can't evacuate, you can leave. That's about as best as I can. We call it in the fire service, we call them TRAs, or temporary refuge areas. They're not they're not a safety zone. A safety zone by definition is an area where firefighters can stand without putting a fire shelter on and be completely safe as the fire passes around us. And those are very huge. So we typically do a temporary refuge area, which is a quick area of a reduced fuel area where we can just hunker down for a little bit. And so that would be a refuge area is something you could designate on your properties for guests or workers to go if a fire moves so fast that you actually can't leave. But you should really heed a close attention to evacuation warnings and evacuation orders. And when you hear an evacuation warning for your area, you need to prepare to leave now, so that when they give the order, if they give the order, that you can leave. And that means getting all your large animals loaded up. That's all your go bag stuff, cars pointed out in the right direction, all those kinds of things to leave, important papers. That's all on the readyforwildfire.org about preparing before the fire to have an exit strategy. I'll let some questions go, but I have a couple of comments on Rich's presentation I want to dovetail on, if I can do that now.
Sure, please.
I have a couple of things. Richard mentioned winners and losers in preparing your vineyard. How firefighters, kind of strategize or they won't concentrate a whole lot of effort into a structure that they know doesn't have a likelihood of surviving. I would posit to you and to all that you should be motivated to prepare your vineyards and buildings because you might not see a fire engine. Okay, and last year we had, I looked up quickly the statistics statewide from Oregon to Mexico when all the fires were going, there was 2,600 unable to fill requests for fire engines. And that means that on the plan, they had needs for fire engines to go to Division A or to do work. And there simply was so much fire so fast that we had 2,600 engines more that we could have used that weren't available. So in preparing your vineyards and your buildings, don't think that every structure is going to get a fire engine associated with it. So think of it that way. And I wanted you to, and he was talking about working with your neighbors. I would posit too that you should work regionally, because you can have a fire far away that affects your vineyard, can ruin your grapes with smoke, can ruin your tourism. from a long evacuation orders or just devastation in the region. So whereas grants, as Noelle was saying, can't go to private entities or for-profit businesses, you guys can get involved in nonprofits like fire safe councils and firewise communities who can get these grants to put a global regional plan together to reduce fuel on the landscape as the whole. I mentioned in one of these one of the questions, we have to live with wildfire. It's the only natural phenomenon that we fight. We don't fight hurricanes, we don't fight snowstorms, but we fight wildland fires. So we have to learn to live with fire, and you need to prepare your structures, harden them, have plans in place to be able to safely live with fire. That was my 2 cents.
Yeah, great tips. Actually, this is another one maybe that you could respond to. Someone asked about fittings and piping dimensions on water sources. And is there a preference for firefighters?
There is. There's 2 standards of typical fire department hose. I would just go to your local fire department and ask what type they use. It's been a while since I was a firefighter, but national pipe straight hose for 1 inch. That's the thread type for like 1 inch hose, and then everything else is bigger is a national pipe. I don't know. It's a certain thread count, but it's standard for all fire engines to be able to hook into. But just check with your local fire department. They'll tell you.
Perfect. Thanks, Chief. Michael, one for you. And it's, who can we talk to for support about insurance issues? It's a really serious issue for our ability to do business and to transition the ownership of the property and business, as it's impacting financing and licensing for all the buyers.
So that's a great question. And I would suggest a couple things. One is, please feel free to contact myself or Tim Schmelzer at Wine Institute. He's been working a lot on this, as has Noelle and others at Wine Institute. We recognize it's a huge problem. I want to piggyback a little bit of an answer with going back to what Tom said about how you're looking at this relative to this is a risk that's a hazard that is part of just where we live in California, right? So we have a history of we had a problem with the Northridge earthquake that they can actually look as we should go back and look at that as an example. After the Northridge earthquake, insurance companies started pulling out of California right and left. And it was a big, big problem because people were just unable to get earthquake insurance. So we did all kinds of stuff with retrofitting, all kinds of stuff around that. But also, the legislature made it difficult for insurance companies to sell products in California if they weren't also selling earthquake insurance. And part of that was done through the California Earthquake Authority to create an incentive for them to participate in that newly created ability to spread the risk across different insurance companies to provide that needed coverage for Californians to protect themselves from exposure in earthquakes. We may be headed on the same road relative to fire insurance. The data call from the Department of Insurance, Insurance Commissioner, will be a critical component part of that. Because if we can get the data around what kinds of policies are being canceled and that kind of an issue, that will help us a lot. Additionally, to the extent that Tim and Noelle and I get this anecdotal information where we can point to specific situations and circumstances, that will also help us as well. So I don't have an immediate solution for people, but know that we're working on it and that we hope to get somewhere by the end of the year and probably into 2022 as well.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Michael. And I think that's just another plea to be engaged with your various associations, Wine Institute, CAWG, regional groups that are all working on these issues on your behalf, including hosting this workshop today. So thank you so much for being involved. Chief Knecht and Rich, thank you for all that you do, all of the service that you provide our communities, our wine regions, and our wineries. Noelle, Michael, thank you for all you do too. And Tracy, always. And thanks for joining us, everyone. And everyone stay safe and make sure you get prepared. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Allison.
Thanks, Allison.
Everybody.
And thanks, everyone.
Thank you.